California is in the middle of a homelessness crisis that does not seem to be getting any better. Many families are worried they are one problem away from needing a place to live. And political reporter Morgan Rynor looked at what policies are working and which ones are not in the country's biggest states and what California can learn. And she joins us now with how California compares to states like Texas, Florida, and New York. Morgan.
Madison, I'm about to take you on a deep dive into the numbers of homeless people in each of those states. But the VP of the National Coalition for the Homeless told me those numbers grossly underestimate the true number of homeless people, leaving out youth and children, which is not as easy to record. And many parents don't want to because of the fear their children will be taken away.
This is the most visible form of homelessness, the camps you see under freeways and along the streets across California.
That's kind of the bottom, showing how do we prevent getting there.
But there's a lot that does not meet the eye.
People really should not judge people that are going through homelessness because you really don't know what led them to get there.
Take Jasmine McIntyre, for example. You won't see her on the streets, but she is homeless, couch hopping from one friend's house to the next.
I had to swallow my pride a lot.
Or this woman, Jane. She's living in her car and asked me not to show her face on camera.
I wouldn't do it, but the first thing I would like to do is rob a bank. Just to live. And that's terrible. I shouldn't feel that way.
The most recent numbers from the United States Interagency on Homelessness recorded are from 2020, just before the pandemic. From 2010 to 2020, Florida saw a decrease of about 30,000. Texas also saw a decrease of almost 8,000. New York saw an increase of about 26,000, but California saw the biggest increase at 38,000. What's working elsewhere? Florida has reduced homelessness by focusing on veterans.
There's been a lot of investment working with really HUD federal, veteran voucher programs, looking at really dollars invested into veteran support services, making sure that veterans have access to get into long-term housing, rental housing. And so that's really been an area where it has, really decreased homelessness.
Dr. Rajni Shakar Brown is the VP of the National Coalition on Homelessness and Stetson University in Florida's Chair of Social Justice Education. California accounts for 12% of the U.S. population, but is home to 28% of the country's homeless veterans.
In Texas, you'll also see the Housing First initiatives in communities have really helped to help reduce numbers.
Does California not have those?
I think California has had those initiatives in pockets.
I brought what she said to one of Governor Gavin Newsom's top homeless advisors, Sacramento Mayor Darrell Steinberg.
The state itself, again, has provided unprecedented resources, much more than Texas or Florida, to convert motels into housing, and veterans are always at the top of the priority list.
What about New York? New York has a rate of homelessness similar to San Francisco and LA, but it has a different character. It's not as obvious.
New York has a right to shelters because legal aid attorneys took the city to court, a couple decades ago, and they forced the city to do something about what at the time was a pretty visible homeless problem.
Unconditional shelter. Tom Albanese is the Fed's Housing and Urban Development's lead technical provider for New York City and Detroit. He is also an independent consultant that helps counties across the country address homelessness. As of January 2020, 72% of California's homeless population is unsheltered. They live outside.
Do you believe that should be implemented in California?
I think it should, but I think we should go a step farther. I think it should be a legal right to housing.
Something he said the state's task force did recommend to the governor and legislature right before the pandemic.
We don't say it's optional to provide a free public education for children. We require the building of public schools. We mandate it because it matters.
Steinberg and all three other experts I spoke to, including the director of the Sacramento Housing Alliance, agree the number one solution is affordable housing. California is home to 7 out of 10 of the most expensive cities for tenants. The median California home is about 2.5 times more expensive than the average national home.
The broader housing and economic conditions are just going in the opposite direction, you can have a significant infusion of more homeless assistance and prevention and still see numbers rise.
To combat this, Newsom has signed 30 housing bills in 2021, and the state budget allocated $12 billion to help mitigate homelessness.
We can't cure it, but I think we can make it better.
That won't be an overnight fix, but it is a step in the right direction. It's also important to note that while Texas and Florida have reduced homelessness, their systems aren't perfect either. Dr. Shankar Brown told me Florida has some of the worst and most inhumane practices, where they sweep people to the outskirts of town and throw their belongings away, something she said parts of California do as well.
And Morgan, California also investing in many hotels. We know Project Home Key and Room Key, but we know that there's those people who don't want to go into shelter or housing no matter what. So what did the experts say is a solution for that?
A few things here, Madison. Tom Albanese told me the number one fear people have going into hotels is that the door will be locked on them and they will be watched like hawks. He said there needs to be better street education to let people know that is not the case. He also said shelter should not be conditional. He said there's no evidence that shows conditional housing, like no drugs, encourages people to stop. In fact, it does the opposite. And then there are just always going to be the people who want to sleep on the streets with the community they've built. And that is the hardest sector to deal with.
Absolutely. And this is a multi-layered problem. But Morgan, it doesn't all fall in the states, though, right?
Not at all. Affordable housing is the number one solution, Madison, and part of that is subsidized housing. The federal government has slashed subsidized housing by 80% over the last 4 decades. There's also another myth that homeless people don't want to work, Madison, when Dr. Shankar Brown told me 40% of them are working 2 jobs, just can't afford the rent here.
It really is so sad to hear. And of course, there is a lot of help out there. Morgan, thank you for that context and in-depth story.